What would you do if you returned from serving your country overseas only to discover complete strangers living in your home? Because your HOA had sold it without your knowledge. Quentin Ralston had been away for nearly a year, 11 long months of heat, dust, and shouted orders on foreign soil. When his plane finally touched down at Dallas-Fort Worth, he exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He was home, finally. He had imagined this moment countless times. The drive west, the familiar stretch of highway toward Weatherford, the sight of his family ranch spread beneath the wide Texas sky. His father's old porch swing, the oak tree he used to scramble up as a boy, the barn that still carried the faint smell of hay, all of it waiting. But when his truck rolled into the driveway that late afternoon, something didn't fit. A minivan was parked where his Chevy should have been. Children's bikes leaned against the fence. Through the front window of his ranch house, the home he'd grown up in, he spotted curtains he didn't recognize, toys scattered across the floor. For a split second, he thought he'd taken a wrong turn, but that was impossible. Every inch of this land was etched into his memory. This was his home, his family's home. Yet strangers were living inside. Quentin cut the engine and stepped out, his boots crunching against the gravel. A woman appeared in the doorway, a toddler perched on her hip, her expression startled like she'd just seen a ghost. "Can I help you?" she asked. Quentin adjusted his stance, still in uniform, duffel slung across his shoulder. "This is my house," he said firmly. "Who are you?" The woman's hold on the child tightened. "I think you're mistaken. We bought this place 6 months ago from the HOA." The words landed like a body blow. The HOA. His gut twisted. He'd paid every bill before deployment, kept his mortgage current, cleared his taxes. He'd left nothing undone. Yet here he stood staring at a stranger holding a child in his living room. "I'm not mistaken," Quentin shot back, voice steady but edged with steel. "My name's Quentin Ralston. This land has been in my family for 3 generations. I didn't sell it, and I sure as hell didn't authorize anyone else to." The woman shifted uneasily. "Look, we have the paperwork. We paid for it. If there's an issue, you'll have to take it up with the HOA. That's all I know." Heat surged through Quentin's chest. He'd faced armed men in hostile villages, but nothing had prepared him for the quiet theft of his home. Turning back toward his truck, his mind spun. The HOA, that meant Sylvia Brenner. She'd ruled the neighborhood for years with clipped words, iron control, and a steady stream of fines and notices. He still remembered when she cited him for parking his truck on the grass overnight. His father had always said Sylvia acted like the subdivision was her personal empire. And now, it seemed, she had crossed a line no one thought she would. As Quentin pulled away, the world blurred outside his window, and memories of his father rose unbidden. The man who had taught him what this land meant. His father had taught him everything that mattered. How to mend a fence, how to break a horse, how to respect the land, because it was the one thing no one could ever create more of. The old man had fought tooth and nail to hold on to the ranch through recessions, lean years, and brutal winters. And now, while Quentin had been away serving overseas, someone had stolen it with nothing more than a signature. He pulled into a gas station on the edge of town and sat there for a long while, staring at the steering wheel. His hands wouldn't stop trembling. Finally, he reached for his phone and called an old friend. Luis Navarro, a sheriff's deputy, had grown up just 2 miles down the road. "Ralston, you back already?" Luis's voice cracked with surprise. "I'm back," Quentin said. His voice was flat, hollow. "And apparently I don't have a house anymore." There was silence on the other end, just a sharp intake of breath. "What are you talking about?" "The HOA sold my ranch," Quentin explained. "There's a family living there right now. They told me they bought it through Brenner." "Jesus," Luis muttered. "Listen, come down to the station. Bring every scrap of paperwork you've got. We'll sort this out. But don't you go confronting anyone, not now. You don't want to end up in cuffs the day you come home." Quentin let out a dry laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Handcuffs are the last thing I want. I just want my house back." "I know, but trust me, this is bigger than it looks. If Brenner pulled this on you, she's probably pulled it on others. Sit tight. We'll figure it out." Quentin ended the call and leaned back in his seat. The neon gas station sign flickered against the hood of his truck. Disbelief, anger, and something sharper coursed through him. Determination. They had taken his home, but they hadn't counted on him coming back ready to fight. What Quentin didn't yet know was that the ranch was only the first move. The HOA had been playing a far larger game, and he was about to peel it wide open. The next morning, Quentin walked into the HOA office in Weatherford. The squat brick building sat squeezed between a dentist's clinic and a feed supply shop. He was still in uniform, partly because he hadn't changed, partly because he wanted Sylvia Brenner to see it. To see him. The lobby smelled faintly of old carpet and burnt coffee. A receptionist barely looked up from her computer as he approached. "I need to see Sylvia," Quentin said. "She's in a meeting," the woman replied, fingers clicking across the keyboard. "Then tell her Staff Sergeant Quentin Ralston is here, about the ranch she sold out from under me." That got her attention. Her eyes flicked up wide before she hurried down the hall. A moment later, Sylvia Brenner emerged. Exactly as he remembered, sharp suit, silver hair pulled back tight, glasses perched low on her nose. At 61, she carried herself like a monarch surveying her kingdom. "Well," she said, folding her arms, "I wondered when you'd return." "You sold my ranch," Quentin said flatly. Her lips thinned into a practiced smile. "Correction, the HOA sold it. After you ignored repeated violations and unpaid dues. You abandoned the property, Sergeant. The board had no choice." Quentin stepped closer, his voice low and steady. "I didn't abandon anything. I was deployed, and federal law protects service members from exactly this kind of stunt." "I paid every cent before I left," Quentin insisted, feeling the words scrape out of him. Sylvia's smile didn't waver. "That's not what our records show. You must have forged something," she replied coolly. Quentin snapped. The receptionist shrank back behind the counter as Sylvia raised a manicured hand. "I suggest you calm yourself. Yelling won't change the fact that the property was sold months ago. Perhaps consult your lawyer instead of harassing the board." Quentin's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice even. "Don't worry, I will." He turned on his heel and walked out, his boots clacking on the tile. The Texas sun hit him like a reality check as he pushed open the door. For the first time since touching down, he felt how big and ugly this mess really was. Sylvia didn't look rattled. She looked practiced, dangerously at ease, like someone who'd run this play before. That afternoon, he met Deputy Luis Navarro at the sheriff's office. Luis slid a hot cup of coffee to him and didn't waste time. "You were right," Luis said. "I checked the county clerk. There's a recorded transfer, filed by the HOA as if it were legit. They pushed it through as a lien foreclosure, claiming unpaid dues and repeated violations." He shook his head. "Only problem, the numbers are inflated. Way inflated. And your receipts are in the county record. You're current." Quentin slammed his fist on the desk. "So they stole it?" "If they did it to you, you can bet you aren't the first," Luis said quietly. "We've had complaints about Brenner's board before, but people either settled or walked away." Quentin exhaled, the fight settling into his bones. "Not this time." Luis studied him and then gave the advice of someone who'd seen the law work both ways. "You're covered under the Service Members Civil Relief Act. Go through Army JAG. Do it right. Push this properly and you won't just get your ranch back. You'll burn their whole scheme down." Quentin nodded. "That's what I'll do." That evening, he sat at his sister Emma's kitchen table in Mineral Wells. Emma Ralston, 5 years older, as stubborn as an ox, had forced a bowl of chili on him and refused to let him speak until he ate. Finally, she slammed her spoon down. "They sold Daddy's land?" she demanded. "Over my dead body." "I'm getting it back," Quentin said. "And I'm going to make sure they can't pull this on anyone else." Emma's eyes flashed. "Good. If Dad were here, he'd be down there flipping tables." They both managed a rough laugh, a little of the tension breaking. Quentin pulled the folder from his duffel and spread every receipt, notice, and letter across the table. "Army JAG will have my back," he said. "Once they dig into this, Sylvia's little kingdom is coming down." Emma tapped one of the receipts, steady as a judge. "You better believe it." "And when you're done, I want to watch her carry her boxes out of that office." Quentin smiled, though his gut stayed tight. This wasn't going to be quick or clean. Sylvia had power, connections, and years of practice, but she hadn't counted on him coming back. And already the cracks in her empire were beginning to show. Other families were whispering the same story, homes stripped away under the guise of unpaid dues. What happened to Quentin wasn't an isolated hit. It was part of a much bigger game. And that game was about to unravel. 2 days later, Quentin walked into the Judge Advocate General's office at Fort Cavazos. The building buzzed with clipped conversations, printers spitting paper, and soldiers moving through hallways with purpose. He carried his folder under one arm like a weapon. Captain Renee Whitfield, a sharp-eyed officer with a calm presence, introduced herself and gestured for him to sit. She flipped through his stack of receipts and notices, nodding slowly. "You kept good records," she said. "That helps. From what I see, this falls squarely under the Service Members Civil Relief Act. It was written to prevent exactly this kind of abuse." "So I'm covered?" Quentin asked. "Legally? Yes, but cases like this drag on. HOAs think they're untouchable. They count on service members being too far away or too tired to fight. You're in a strong position, though. You're back, you've got documentation, and if their records don't line up, they're in trouble." Quentin leaned forward. "Trouble isn't enough. They took my home, my father's land. I want them held accountable." Captain Whitfield studied him for a beat, then nodded. "If there's a pattern, we'll find it. And if it's fraud, they'll answer for it." That night, Quentin lay in his motel room off I-20, staring at the slow-turning ceiling fan. Sleep never came. His mind replayed the scene at the ranch, the woman holding a child at his front door, insisting the home was hers. He didn't blame her. She was just another pawn. But the image burned in his head all the same. The next morning, his phone buzzed. Luis Navarro's voice came through, tight with urgency. "You're not going to believe this. We've had 3 more complaints since you showed up. Families saying the HOA forced sales over supposed unpaid dues. Same story every time. Fees piling up out of nowhere, then suddenly their house is gone." Quentin's grip on the phone tightened. "Names? I've got 2 for you right now. Franklin Ortega on Mesquite Drive and the Holbrooks on Ridgeway. Both lost their places this past year. You want to talk to them?" "I do," Quentin said without hesitation. "Set it up." That afternoon, he slid into a booth at a diner with Franklin Ortega. The man looked worn down, 50s, grease still under his nails from the auto shop. He wrapped both hands around a chipped coffee cup like it was the only thing keeping him steady. "They said I owed 10,000 in dues," Franklin muttered. 10 grand. I've lived in that house 20 years. Never missed a payment. But they said I was late. Fees on top of fees, penalties, interest. I couldn't keep up. Then one day, a notice shows up on the door. 2 months later, it was gone. "Sold to who?" Quentin asked. Franklin shook his head. "Some couple from Dallas, paid cash." Quiet as a whisper, like it was all prearranged. Quentin's stomach turned. It felt too clean, too rehearsed. That evening, he sat across from the Holbrooks in their cramped apartment on the edge of town. The retired teachers looked beaten. "They told the same story," Mrs. Holbrook said softly. "They said we'd violated lawn maintenance rules too many times. We owed for repairs we never requested." Next thing we knew, we were standing before a judge who said the HOA had the right to foreclose, her husband added, his hands trembling. "We didn't even understand what was happening until it was over." "We didn't have the money to fight," he said. "We thought maybe we'd done something wrong." Quentin shook his head. "It wasn't you. It was them. And I promise you, we're going to expose it." The Holbrooks watched him with exhausted skepticism, but something like hope flickered in their eyes. Later, alone in his truck, Quentin gripped the wheel until his knuckles went white. Sylvia wasn't merely ruthless, she ran a racket. She and her board had engineered a machine that chewed up lives and spat out deeds, and somehow the courts had looked the other way. But with the Army and JAG involved, that machine finally had a wrench jammed into its gears. He thumbed a text to Luis. "This isn't just my fight. It's everyone's." A minute later, Luis replied, "Then buckle up, brother. Once you start, there's no turning back." What neither man realized was Sylvia had already felt the walls closing in, and she was preparing to push back in ways Quentin couldn't yet imagine. She didn't panic. Panic would be amateur hour. For nearly 20 years, she'd steered the HOA, building a reputation for being untouchable. The Ralston name still carried weight in Weatherford. Quentin's father had been respected, and now his son was making waves. Rumors spread fast, and Sylvia knew the moment whispers reached the Army's legal offices, her neat little operation would begin to look very messy. Inside her sprawling brick house on the cul-de-sac, polished to a frightening shine, Sylvia called an emergency board meeting. 4 members gathered at her dining table, surrounded by stacks of ledgers and paper. "We have a problem," she said, adjusting her glasses. "Staff Sergeant Ralston is back. He's already contacted local law enforcement in JAG." Curtis Doyle, a wiry board member, shifted uneasily. "Can't we just return the properties? Call it a mistake?" Sylvia's glare cut him off. "A mistake? If we reverse one, the rest collapse. Do you want to explain to a dozen families that their deeds are worthless? Do you want lawsuits crawling over us from every direction?" Silence settled like a weight. Cheryl Masters, another board member, finally broke it. "Then what's the plan?" "Then we tighten ranks," Sylvia said, voice flat with authority. "Every document is in order. Every sale is filed with the county clerk. If they accuse us of fraud, we point to the records. As long as we present a united front, there's nothing they can do." Curtis muttered. "Unless someone talks." Sylvia's gaze sharpened. No one talks. Meanwhile, Quentin wasn't sitting on his hands. Captain Renee Whitfield had already filed motions to halt any further HOA foreclosures while the investigation proceeded. She told Quentin the Army's involvement would carry real weight in federal court, but this fight wasn't just legal. It was political. The more families who stepped forward, the harder it would be for Sylvia to paint him as a lone troublemaker. Late one evening, Luis called again, his voice low with urgency. "Ralston, you've stirred a hornet's nest. People are coming out of the woodwork. I've got 6 new names, folks who say they were bullied out of their homes. Some are too scared to go public, but they'll talk to you privately." Quentin rubbed his temples, the worry knotting behind his eyes. "Brenner's got pull?" he asked. "She's got reach," Luis said. "People say she threatened them with liens, fines, lawsuits if they spoke up. One man claims his truck was vandalized after he complained at a meeting." Quentin felt his anger burn hotter. "Then we'll give them a reason not to be afraid," he said. The next day, he met Franklin Ortega again, this time with 2 other displaced homeowners inside the diner's back room. The smell of frying oil and coffee hung in the air as they leaned over steaming cups, plotting quiet resistance. "They can't keep getting away with it," Franklin said, voice low. "People need to see someone standing up." "Most of us thought we didn't stand a chance," Quentin replied. "You do now. The Army's in. This isn't just a neighborhood spat, it's federal. If you're willing to give statements, you'll have protection." One of the others, Patrice Nolan, twisted her hands together. "I'm scared," she admitted. "My husband's health is bad. We can't afford stress or a long legal fight." Quentin softened. "I get it. I really do. But think about what they took. The next family they'll target if nobody speaks. If we all step forward together, they can't silence every one of us." Patrice's eyes filled, but she nodded slowly. "All right, I'll talk." Later that night, Quentin sat in his truck and watched his ranch from a distance. A porch light glowed where his father's swing should have creaked in the breeze. He thought about the family inside. People who weren't villains so much as victims, duped into buying property they didn't know was stolen. The sight tightened his chest. That was supposed to be his home, the place of his childhood and his father's legacy. Back at her house, an immaculate brick home on the cul-de-sac, Sylvia took a call from a county contact. "The Army filed an injunction today," the voice said, Sylvia's lips pressed into a thin line. "Let them come," she replied, voice cold and composed. "They won't find what they're looking for." For the first time in years, though, something in her demeanor flickered, an unspoken awareness that the neat little world she'd built might be wobbling at the seams. Sylvia felt the first real crack in her armor. She poured herself a glass of wine, the rim trembling faintly against her lips. For years, she had believed she could outmaneuver anyone, neighbors, lawyers, even the county. But she hadn't accounted for Quentin Ralston, a soldier back from war, furious and armed with the law. As Quentin gathered allies, Sylvia quietly began sketching a counterattack, one that threatened to pull the entire neighborhood into chaos. Inside the Parker County Courthouse, Quentin sat at a long oak table, papers spread before him. Captain Whitfield had organized the session, and now the room was filled with weary homeowners, each with a story, a file of notices, or just the exhaustion written on their faces. Whitfield's voice cut through the murmur. "We're here to document every incident tied to the HOA's foreclosures. I need each of you to speak clearly and truthfully. The more consistent your accounts, the stronger the case." One by one, voices filled the chamber. Franklin Ortega spoke of inflated dues and surprise violations. Patrice Nolan recounted how her family was cited for landscaping issues when their lawn had been pristine. The Holbrooks described being blindsided in court, too overwhelmed to defend themselves as the gavel fell. Quentin listened, his anger condensing into something harder, purpose. When his turn came, he spoke quietly but with steel in his voice. "I was serving in Kuwait when my ranch was taken. I paid every bill before I left. They claimed I abandoned my property. They lied. And while I was defending my country, they stole my home." The room went still. Even those who had already spoken leaned in, reminded that this wasn't just about lost houses or unfair fees. It was about dignity. In the hallway afterward, Luis caught up with Quentin. "You're turning into the face of this fight," he said. "People are looking at you like their voice." Quentin shook his head. "I didn't ask for that." "You didn't have to," Luis replied. "It's yours now." Across town, Sylvia sat stiffly in her leather chair, watching her board splinter. Curtis Doyle slammed a folder onto the polished table. "This is getting out of control," he snapped. "We can't keep pretending this is business as usual. Too many eyes are on us now." "Calm yourself," Sylvia hissed, eyes narrowing. "The courts have upheld us before. They'll do it again, unless—" her voice sharpened. "You'd like to confess to wrongdoing?" Curtis blanched. "I'm not confessing to anything, but I'm not going down with this ship either." Cheryl Masters leaned forward, voice low and dangerous. "Then maybe it's time we decide whether this is still Sylvia's ship or ours." When the very protections guaranteed to him under federal law were violated. His property was taken without due process under inflated claims and fabricated violations, and he is not alone. This court will hear testimony from multiple families who suffered the same fate under the same board. "This isn't a neighborhood dispute, Your Honor. It is a pattern of fraud." The judge leaned forward slightly, hands folded, eyes sharp. "Proceed." At the defense table, Sylvia's lead attorney rose with practiced smoothness. "Your Honor, with respect, this is a gross exaggeration. Every foreclosure was carried out under proper procedure, with county records to verify. The plaintiff's accusations stem not from fact but from frustration. We intend to prove that Mr. Ralston abandoned his obligations and that this board acted within its rights." Quentin clenched his fists under the table, but Whitfield placed a steady hand on his arm. "Patience," she murmured. "This is where the record speaks." As the first witness, Franklin Ortega, took the stand, reporters in the gallery scribbled furiously. Franklin's voice cracked as he described the sudden $10,000 bill that appeared out of nowhere, the penalties stacking until he was crushed. "I've lived in that house 20 years. Paid every month. Then they say I owe a fortune I don't have, and one day it's gone." "Just gone," Sylvia's attorney objected. "Anecdotal and irrelevant." The judge's gavel tapped once. "Overruled. Continue." Quentin felt the tide turning, slow, steady, but real. Still, he could see Sylvia's composure from across the room. No panic, no cracks in her mask. She looked like someone who had already calculated every move, as if she had a card still hidden in her hand. When the session adjourned for recess, Quentin stepped into the hallway. A dozen reporters crowded him, voices flying. "Do you think you'll win? Are you representing more families? Do you believe the HOA acted criminally?" He pushed through, jaw tight, and saw Luis waiting near the elevators. "They're rattled," Luis said. "Doesn't look like it," Quentin muttered, glancing back at Sylvia, who swept past the cameras like royalty. "She's acting," Luis replied. "But I've got word. Someone on her board is talking." "Quiet, but enough to spook her." Quentin stopped cold. "Who?" Luis shook his head. Not yet. But if they flip on her in court... He trailed off, letting the thought hang. Quentin exhaled. For the first time, he realized Sylvia wasn't untouchable anymore. Quentin had been fulfilling his duty to the country when his property was wrongfully foreclosed by the Homeowners Association, led by Mrs. Brenner. Evidence would show that his account was current, and that other families had fallen victim to the same unfair tactics. Sylvia's lead attorney countered smoothly, his voice calm and confident, the tone of someone accustomed to winning. Your Honor, the HOA followed all proper procedures. Mr. Ralston failed to meet his obligations as a homeowner. Our records document unpaid dues, violations, and a lawful foreclosure process. This is not fraud. It is enforcement of community standards. Quentin clenched his fists beneath the table, itching to stand and shout. Captain Whitfield's steady hand on his arm reminded him to stay calm. Patience, she whispered. One by one, witnesses took the stand. Franklin Ortega described the sudden fees and penalties that snowballed into foreclosure. Patrice Nolan's voice trembled as she recounted Sylvia personally threatening her family with legal action if they didn't comply. The Holbrooks painted a picture of confusion and helplessness, swept along by a process they barely understood. Sylvia remained stone-faced throughout, whispering occasionally to her attorney but never losing composure. Finally, it was Quentin's turn. He stood, walked to the witness stand, and swore in. His voice carried steady weight as he spoke of deployment, bills paid before he left, and the shock of returning home to strangers on his property. I served 11 months in Kuwait, Quentin said, locking eyes with the judge. I was protecting this country, and I came back to find my father's land stolen. Everything I worked for, everything he built, gone. Not because I failed, but because someone decided my absence made me an easy target. The courtroom fell silent. Even the reporters stopped typing. During cross-examination, Sylvia's attorney tried to unsettle him. Mr. Ralston, can you prove beyond a doubt that you paid every bill before leaving? Quentin's jaw tightened. Yes, the receipts are in the folder you're holding. Isn't it possible you simply forgot something under the stress of deployment? I never forgot my responsibilities, not to my unit and not to my home, Quentin replied. The judge intervened before the questioning could continue. By the end of the day, a temporary injunction was announced. All HOA foreclosures tied to Sylvia's board were suspended pending a full investigation. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was a crack in Sylvia's fortress. As they left the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Microphones and cameras jostled for his attention. Staff Sergeant, how does it feel to finally face Mrs. Brenner in court? Do you believe you'll get your ranch back? Do you think the HOA committed fraud on a larger scale? Quentin paused at the top of the steps. He wasn't a man who sought the spotlight, but this fight wasn't just his anymore. This isn't just my fight, he said, voice steady, eyes forward. He looked out at the crowd of reporters, cameras flashing and pens scribbling furiously, and said, This isn't just about me. It's about every family that's been pushed around by people who thought they were too small to matter. We're going to see this through. Somewhere in the crowd, Sylvia Brenner watched with narrowed eyes, lips pressed thin. But Quentin didn't yet realize she had allies beyond the courtroom, people with money and influence who wouldn't let her empire crumble without a fight. The week after the injunction passed in a blur. Calls came from newspapers across Texas, and even national outlets wanted Quentin's story. Soldiers reached out through social media. Veterans groups voiced support. Neighbors he barely knew offered handshakes or pats on the back, but with every show of solidarity, the pressure grew heavier. One evening, Quentin sat on the porch of his sister Emma's house, the phone buzzing non-stop. She set down 2 mugs of coffee and sat beside him. You're becoming the face of this whole fight, Emma said. I never wanted that, Quentin admitted, staring into the yard. I just wanted my ranch back. Doesn't matter, she replied. People see you standing up to Brenner and they're rallying behind you. You can't turn away now. Quentin rubbed the back of his neck. I know, but the more people I represent, the more I've got to lose if this goes wrong. Emma's voice softened. That's exactly why you can't let it go wrong. While Quentin wrestled with the weight of responsibility, Sylvia Brenner was far from idle. She knew the courtroom had shifted momentum against her, and the Ralston name was plastered across every headline. But she still had leverage, friends in high places, deep pockets, and a network of county officials who had long benefited from her HOA's control. Late one night, Sylvia sat in her study with her attorney, Mark Talbot. The room smelled of leather and oak polish. Shelves were lined with law books she never read. "This soldier is making you look like the villain," Talbot said, tapping a finger on a newspaper spread across the desk. "If this keeps up, public opinion will sway the courts." "We can't afford that." "Then shift the narrative," Sylvia replied sharply. "Make him look unstable, a hothead fresh back from war, not thinking clearly. People will believe it." Talbot hesitated. "That's risky," Sylvia snapped. "Everything is risky." "But perception wins cases just as much as facts. You know that." Within days, whispers began to circulate. Anonymous posts online questioned Quentin's mental stability. A blog claimed he had a history of violent behavior. Local gossip painted him as aggressive, impossible to reason with. At first, Quentin ignored it. But when an old acquaintance stopped him in town and asked if he was doing okay after everything overseas, he realized the smear campaign was working. He stormed into Luis Navarro's office, slamming the door behind him. "They're trying to paint me as unhinged," Quentin said, his voice low but burning. "They're dragging my service through the mud." Luis leaned back in his chair. "That's Brenner's playbook. If she can't beat you with rules, she'll try to beat you with rumors," Quentin muttered. "She's messing with the wrong man," Louise replied, but sighed. "Don't take the bait. The worst thing you can do right now is give her a reason to say she's right. Keep calm. Let Whitfield handle it." Quentin paced the office, fists clenched. He wanted to fight back, to shout the truth from every rooftop, but Louise was right. Losing his temper would only feed their narrative. That night, Captain Whitfield called. "I heard about the rumors," she said. "Stay focused. We're filing for discovery next week. That means we'll start pulling their internal records. If Brenner's been manipulating finances, we'll find it. That's how we win. Not through gossip, but proof." Quentin exhaled slowly. Proof. That's all he needed. Still, doubt gnawed at him. He thought of the families who had trusted him. The Holbrooks, Patrice Nolan, Franklin Ortega. He stared into his coffee cup as if it were the only thing keeping him from falling apart. They were counting on him. If Sylvia's tactics succeeded, all of them would lose again. Back at her house, Sylvia poured another glass of wine, listening to the hum of her phone buzzing with updates from Talbot. The smear campaign was spreading, but for the first time, unease crept in. She had underestimated Quentin Ralston. He wasn't just fighting for himself, he was rallying the entire community behind him. And that, she realized, was far more dangerous than any lawsuit. But just as Sylvia doubled down on her strategy, the first cracks in her fortress began to show. Documents surfaced suggesting the HOA's books weren't as clean as she claimed, and soon the truth was about to spill out in ways no one could contain. It started with a single folder. Captain Renee Whitfield slid it across the table in her office at Fort Cavazos, her face calm but her eyes bright with something close to triumph. "We got discovery," she said, and Brenner's board handed over more than they realized. Quentin leaned forward and opened the folder. Inside were spreadsheets, payment records, and scanned letters with HOA letterheads. At first glance, everything seemed routine, but Captain Whitfield pointed to a column of numbers. "See this?" she said. "They logged late fees on accounts that were already marked as paid. Here, for example, Ortega's file. His payment cleared on the 10th, but 5 days later, they added a penalty for late dues. That's impossible, and it happened over and over again." Quentin scanned the papers, his pulse quickening. "So, they manufactured debt." "Exactly," he said. "They created a paper trail to justify foreclosures. And if we can show a pattern across multiple families, that's fraud." He closed the folder slowly. This was it. Proof. That evening, he met Louise at the diner where it had all begun. They slid into a booth in the back, the hum of conversation and clinking silverware around them. Quentin spread the folder across the table. Louise whistled low. Well, I'll be damned. They cooked the books, and now we can prove it. Shaking her head, she added, You realize what this means? It's not just Brenner, Quentin said, leaning back, the weight of it settling over him. The whole board's implicated. Maybe even county officials if they look the other way. Good, Louise muttered. Let it burn. Meanwhile, Sylvia Brenner sat in her office, poring over the same spreadsheets with her attorney, Mark Talbot. He was pale, jaw tight. This doesn't look good, Talbot muttered. It's paperwork, Sylvia said dismissively. No jury will sort through thousands of lines of numbers. Talbot shot her a sharp look. Don't be naive. The Army lawyers will break this down in plain English. They'll show it's fraud. If that happens, you're not just losing the case, you're facing charges. Sylvia's hand trembled slightly as she set down her pen. Then we bury it. We find a scapegoat. Curtis Doyle handled most of the finances, she added. Let him take the fall. But Curtis Doyle had already begun to distance himself. That same night, he called Luis Navarro anonymously, his voice cracking over the receiver. I can't do this anymore, Curtis said. Brenner told me to sign things I knew weren't right. Late fees, inflated penalties. It was all orchestrated. She said it was policy. I thought it was legal, but it wasn't. If you give me protection, I'll testify. Louise leaned forward, heart pounding. You're sure about this? Positive. I've got emails, copies of memos. She knew exactly what we were doing. The next day, Curtis sat across from Quentin and Captain Whitfield, hands shaking as he slid a thumb drive across the table. This has everything, Curtis said quietly. Emails, internal notes, instructions from Brenner. She told us to target vulnerable homeowners, people deployed, elderly couples, families behind on medical bills. Said they were easy to push, Quentin's stomach turned. Easy to push? That's how she saw us, Curtis admitted, shame heavy in his voice. I'm sorry I was part of it. I thought it was just business. But it's not. It's theft. Captain Whitfield pocketed the drive. Mr. Doyle, if you're willing to testify, this case just became much stronger. Word spread quickly that a board member had flipped. Sylvia felt the ground shift beneath her feet. At the next HOA meeting, she tried to project confidence, but the murmurs were different now, sharper, more hostile. Homeowners whispered about missing money, shady sales, and the board's sudden silence. One resident stood up, voice rising. Where's our money, Sylvia? Where's the transparency? For the first time, Sylvia's polished composure cracked. She slammed the gavel and demanded order, but the room no longer bowed to her authority. Later that night, she sat alone in her study, staring at the ledger books. For years, she had ruled this neighborhood like a fiefdom, believing no one could touch her. But Quentin Ralston had returned, and with him came something she had never accounted for, truth backed by proof. The fight was far from over. As the case gained traction, it threatened to spill beyond the courtroom, pulling in federal investigators and placing the entire neighborhood under a spotlight. The spotlight on Sylvia Brenner's empire grew brighter than she ever imagined. By midsummer, the case had stretched far beyond Parker County. Federal investigators arrived from the Department of Justice, armed with subpoenas and quiet authority that made even seasoned attorneys uneasy. They weren't just looking at Sylvia anymore. They were combing through years of HOA records, bank accounts, and property transfers that spanned neighborhoods across multiple counties. Quentin stood outside the courthouse one morning as unmarked black SUVs rolled up. Agents in plain suits stepped out, carrying briefcases with precise purpose. Louise joined him on the steps, shaking her head. Never thought I'd see the day, she said. The feds in Weatherford, digging through HOA books. Quentin crossed his arms. She brought it on herself. They all did. Inside, the investigators spread across offices, quietly gathering files. Curtis Doyle, now under protection, walked them through Sylvia's scheme, every fake fee, inflated violation, and manufactured lien, laid out in stark black and white. One agent, tall with a clipped voice, turned to Quentin. We've already identified at least 12 families who lost property under suspicious circumstances. Some homes were resold to developers at below-market prices, then flipped for profit. This isn't just HOA abuse, it's fraud, conspiracy, maybe even racketeering. Quentin felt both vindicated and sick to his stomach. Vindicated because the truth was finally surfacing. Sick because so many families had been chewed up in the process. That evening, he returned to Emma's house, exhausted but determined. She met him at the door, arms crossed. "You look like you've carried the weight of 10 men," she said. "Feels like it," Quentin admitted. "Every time we dig deeper, it's worse than I thought." "She wasn't just after me. She built an empire on stolen homes." Emma shook her head slowly. "Daddy always said land shows you who people really are. Some guard it, some exploit it." Quentin gave a tired smile. "Guess we're seeing which one Sylvia is." Across town, Sylvia sat at her dining table, empire crumbling. She had called a private meeting with her attorney, Mark Talbot, and Cheryl Masters, the only board member loyal enough to show. Talbot didn't mince words. "The DOJ is circling. They're not just investigating civil violations anymore. If they press charges, you could be looking at prison." Sylvia's hands tightened around her wine glass. "Prison? For enforcing HOA bylaws?" She spat. "Don't play dumb," Talbot snapped. Curtis flipped. "They've got emails, memos. Your fingerprints are on everything. The only question now is how hard they'll come after you." Cheryl shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we should cooperate." "Cut a deal?" Sylvia's glare could have cut glass. "You think I'm going to sit in a cell while that soldier prances around on the evening news like a hero? Never. I built this neighborhood. I made it desirable. Those people should be thanking me." Her voice shook slightly, and for the first time, Cheryl saw the cracks of desperation beneath the iron mask. Meanwhile, Quentin received a call from Captain Whitfield. "The investigators want you to testify in Washington," Captain Whitfield said, her voice calm but firm. "Your case is becoming the centerpiece of a broader inquiry into HOA abuse. They think it could set a precedent nationwide." Quentin rubbed his forehead. "Washington? I didn't sign up to be a symbol." "You didn't," Whitfield said gently, "but you became one. And symbols matter." Quentin hung up and sat in silence for a long time. He thought of the Holbrooks, crammed into their small apartment. Of Franklin Ortega, still working late shifts at the garage because he couldn't get back on his feet after losing his home. Of Patrice Nolan, who had cried through half her testimony, her voice breaking when she told how her children asked if they'd ever have a backyard again. Maybe he hadn't signed up to be a symbol, but he couldn't walk away from what it had come to. Mean. The next hearing drew an even larger crowd. News vans lined the street. Veterans groups stood outside, waving flags and chanting in support of Quentin. Sylvia arrived in a black sedan, her face hidden behind oversized sunglasses, but the boos followed her all the way into the courthouse. Inside, Captain Whitfield presented the federal findings: fraudulent ledgers, forged penalties, coordinated sales. The judge listened intently, his expression hardening with each passing page. When Sylvia took the stand, she tried to maintain her icy composure, but under cross-examination, her voice wavered. The emails were undeniable. The memos were too clear. Her empire of control was collapsing in front of everyone. For the first time, the entire courtroom could see it. Quentin watched, not with joy, but with resolve. This wasn't about humiliating her. It was about justice. But even as the case barreled toward its climax, one question still loomed. Would the families ever truly get back what was stolen from them, or had the damage already cut too deep? The courthouse was packed. Rows of wooden benches creaked under the weight of neighbors, reporters, and displaced families, all waiting for months to hear the outcome. The air was thick with tension. Every cough, every shuffle of paper seemed impossibly loud. Quentin sat at the front, uniform freshly pressed, hands folded tightly on the table. He didn't look at Sylvia Brenner, seated across from him. He didn't need to. He could feel her eyes on him, sharp, seething. When the judge finally entered, silence fell. His gavel struck once, echoing through the chamber. "This court," the judge began, voice steady, "has reviewed the evidence presented by both parties, the financial records, the testimony of homeowners, and the internal communications provided by a member of the HOA board. One fact is clear. The foreclosures carried out under the direction of Mrs. Sylvia Brenner and the Homeowners Association were fraudulent, predatory, and illegal. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Sylvia's attorneys shifted uncomfortably. She sat rigid, jaw clenched. The court hereby nullifies the sales of all properties tied to these fraudulent actions. Titles will be restored to the original owners. Furthermore, Mrs. Brenner and complicit members of the HOA board are referred to federal prosecutors for charges of fraud, conspiracy, and abuse of power. The gavel struck again. Case adjourned. For a moment, no one moved. Then the room erupted. Cheers from families, reporters rushing to the aisles, neighbors embracing one another. Quentin sat still, chest tight, eyes fixed on the judge's bench as if he had to hear the words again to believe them. His ranch, his father's land, was his once more. Emma gripped his arm.
"You did it,"
she whispered, eyes shining. Quentin shook his head. "We did it. All of us." As Sylvia was escorted out, a wave of voices followed her, some angry, some triumphant. She didn't look back. For the first time in decades, she wasn't in control. Outside, the courthouse steps were alive with cameras and microphones. Reporters shouted questions, but Quentin lifted a hand. "I'm not here to celebrate me," he said, voice steady, carrying over the crowd. "I'm here to celebrate justice. This wasn't about one ranch. It was about every family who was told they didn't matter. Today proves they do." Applause broke out. Veterans in the crowd saluted. Families who had lost everything clutched one another, tears streaming. For them, it wasn't just property being returned. It was dignity. In the weeks that followed, federal prosecutors filed charges against Sylvia and several board members. Curtis Doyle, the man who had flipped, was placed under protection and agreed to testify in the criminal trial. The story spread nationwide, sparking debates on news shows about HOA abuse and service members' rights. Quentin spent long days at the ranch, clearing brush, mending fences, walking the land his father had left him. Strangers came by just to shake his hand. Some asked for advice on their own battles with HOAs. He didn't have all the answers, but he listened. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the fields glowed gold, Emma joined him by the porch swing. "You know," she said, "you've become more than just a soldier. You've become a voice for people who never had one." Quentin looked out over the land. "I never wanted to be a symbol. I just wanted to come home," Emma smiled. "Sometimes coming home means fighting for more than yourself." He thought about that as fireflies sparked in the dusk. The fight had been long, ugly, and exhausting, but it had ended with justice. Families had their homes back. The board's scheme was shattered, and most importantly, a message had been sent. No one is too small to matter. Quentin whispered his father's words under his breath. Land shows you who people really are. He understood now. Some would abuse it. Some would protect it. He knew which one he had chosen. The camera crews eventually left. The headlines faded. Life slowly returned to normal. But for Quentin, the lesson remained sharp. Silence lets injustice grow, but one voice, backed by truth, can tear it down. Weeks later, when another veteran reached out, his HOA threatening foreclosure while he was deployed, Quentin didn't hesitate. He picked up the phone, ready to stand beside him. Because this fight wasn't just about one ranch in Weatherford, it was about making sure no soldier, no family, no neighbor ever came home to find their life stolen again. As he leaned back on the porch swing, Quentin felt peace for the first time since stepping off that plane. He had come home, not just to his land, but to his purpose. If this story moved you, remember, every story has a lesson, and together we can keep them alive.